Good morning. You are listening to WXOX 97.1 FM in Louisville or streaming on artxfm.com. This is LVA's Artebella on the Radio, the show produced by Louisville Visual Art. My name is Keith Waits, and I'm your host. And today I'm talking to Uhma Janus. She is a native of León, Guanajuato in Mexico. Her work includes abstract pieces, monographs, and portraits. Some of the elements that can be recognized in them reflect her interests in the fundamental, in all that exists as interconnected, and in their inherent dynamism as complex systems in the disciplines of geometry, physics, biology, neuroscience, and human physiology. So, and we're talking to Uhma today in particular at this moment in time because she just opened a new exhibit, a one-person show called Beginnings at the Melwood Arts Center in the Pigment Gallery, and that will run through July 30th. So, Uhma, thank you for being with me.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. Very happy.
So, if somebody goes to the Pigment Gallery to see your show, describe the kind of work they're going to encounter there.
Yeah, so this is my first solo show, and it's very appropriate to show some of the most representative work that I have collected so far, like from the time of when I started painting, and what you will be able to see, it's kind of like the summary of so far, kind of like the language that I have created to represent the things that matter to me in the world. And I think you will be able to see kind of like some different kind of like the alphabet. I'll put it like that. Mm-hmm.
Well, it's kind of like a catalog of your work to date. Is that fair
yes.
to say?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've seen the show, and there are different kinds of things going on there. Although there's a similarity in the sort of the visual, let's say, visual texture of them. Your work has a certain energy that comes from this. The background you have is scientific, as was reflected in, I think, in that statement. And you've approached making art from sort of a scientific point of view. Talk a little bit about that. How that I think it seems very directly reflective in sort of the mark making and the way that you build these patterns.
Yeah. Two things come to mind without question. The first has to do, yes, when it comes just to kind of like a representation, even kind of like the abstract pieces, it all has to do with the parts. And yes, I think that is related to just like my general interest that I have always had in, how everything can be divided into the pieces, into the elements, and how you can, study each part, but then how that, makes the whole thing. And then kind of like that relationship between the components and kind of like the system as a whole. So that's kind of like in the abstract pieces, but then there are others that are more kind of like a story that I'm trying to tell, that also, like, my approach to it is like a study in itself, like kind of trying to understand what is it that I'm trying to tell, and then reconstructing like all the parts, and then take the appropriate symbols for each of those so that I can kind of like tell that story. So yes, there is a lot of that kind of scientific approach of kind of deconstructing and then analyzing each of the things, and then see how everything kind of be pulled together again.
When you first started to draw or paint or any of the mediums, whatever you first started, did you know what you wanted to get onto the page, or was it and I think you kind of hinted at this just a second ago, or was it right away sort of an exploration of just like of getting a mark on the page? How formed was it in your mind when you first started to make art?
Yeah, it was totally like a blank page. It was very experimental. And I mean, I still remember that first night. I just had some some paper with me, some acrylic inks that I had bought just because I was encouraged to do so, to use them one day. And it was just kind of like this need to just start making one line, literally one line. And I had no clue. I actually didn't care where this was going. It was just like, just let the line become. And so that's what I did. And my, like those first pieces were like, abstract kind of dots, lines, curvilinear things. And it was just kind of like doing this in this state of watching what was happening, and just of course experimenting with lines in different directions. But yes, it was it has, and it still is, kind of like a very open approach. The majority of my work is like that. I do have some pieces in which I may have an idea and then I come up with this design, and I do want it like in a very particular way, but for the most part it is like that. Mm-hmm.
Well, and it also, it's fascinating because I've known several people that are self-trained artists who, which really just means people didn't go through formal art training when they went through their higher education. Like you are well educated and credentialed, but not as an artist. And so it's fascinating to see somebody take that kind of background and step in the direction of art. When I look at your work, I think there's a lot of different things. There are some that are abstract and have patterns that start to suggest something like a mandala, but there's also portraits, or at least I don't know if they're portraits, but they seem to be human faces, but they have kind of whimsical titles.
Yes.
But when I look at them, it's clear that I'm looking at a face, but I start thinking about things like and some of this, I'm not an expert on this, but sort of some things like energy fields or auras, this sort of discussion about how that there's more to seeing a person than that's the simple, what we think of as a portrait. Is that something you're consciously trying to achieve, or I mean, how specifically intellectual are you in that approach?
Yeah, as far as those portraits, which is more like the representation of a personality, that's how I approach those. And it is, yeah, it is. I had not thought it the way you're putting it, but I think it is interesting because I think even though I didn't consciously think it, there is the idea of this kind of very wholesomeness to how a person is. And so maybe the way I make those heads, with all the curves that you can see, it is a connection with that kind of like a spherical kind of a thing, as something that is wholesome, rather than something, like a label of being mad or being angry. It's more like this kind of continuum. And actually the way I start drawing those is just with a single line, non-stopping, from the center, like the forehead, and then just going around in circles until I get kind of like the main feature. But it is, I enjoy doing that. It is like, it's not my left brain trying to decide how this head is. It's more just something kind of that is flowing, and that is in itself one thing.
Well, and you're right that they don't seem emotional. They seem metaphysical, or they, there's not a personality in a being reflected in a traditional sense, but there is a more complex sort of diagram of personality, I think, is what you're talking about. Yeah. Well, in the sense that there's not like an angry face, or something like that. Like it's much, there's much more to it. This is one of the challenges of talking to visual artists on the radio, is trying to talk about visual art and describe it, and because ultimately we will fail because you must view it. And I'll take this opportunity to point out your website, which is uhmajanus.com, and I'll spell that out: MAJANUS.com. And also, I once again make the point that I make in almost every show, which is that websites and internet presences are very important ways to seek out and discover artists, but to really understand and appreciate the work, you must go be in the room with the work. So I think that's very important. I think we live in a time where I think a lot of people feel like it's enough to see it on a computer screen.
Right.
But I think, particularly there's something too, when you look at things on a computer screen, which is how I've seen your work probably mostly, but then to be in a room with them, there's such energy in the imagery, the building of those lines and shapes and repetitive patterns and things like that. It's so kinetic, and it kind of, and some of them are quite large. So there's a real energy, and once you get a group of them together and you find yourself, the way the gallery is situated, I'm not sure if you're ever quite boxed in, but there are times when, you look in any direction and you're looking at one of the paintings or drawings, and that energy, I don't say they start to compete, but it's almost like they start to talk to each other. Did you find that? You say this is your first solo show. Did you find were there things that you thought about the work maybe a little bit differently, or saw even new things for yourself in putting that work together in a room?
Yeah, it was very interesting because I had the opportunity to have in my previous house, like have most of my work kind of covering walls, but not with like having all this work together like this. And it is quite interesting to see that. I wouldn't see them as competing, but I would think more than kind of like the force of some of them in particular kind of like really jump at you. And so you can quite appreciate that. I did enjoy having kind of like different types of work together, just as a contrasting view a little bit. And there are some that are more kind of like just to be there pensive and resting a little bit, but then the other ones, then you get that whole other effect that you mentioned. So I did enjoy having the opportunity to experience that in such a space.
Well, there was, I think, if I remember correctly, the one that I thought was the most active, the busiest sort of energy was hung over by the windows, which almost seemed to be, and they're good sized windows, but that almost seemed to be sort of a way of providing some sort of balance to the energy coming off that painting. Because I think if you focus in on that one painting, it's sort of a lot, there's sort of like and I don't know, it's hard to describe, and I'm not sure if you understand the painting I'm talking about, but it's fairly abstract, and it seems to be sort of a sort of a pattern with a lot of smaller lines moving. I just kept thinking like, wow, this would really look cool if it were animated, because it does start to move.
I know, yeah. In a few seconds that you're looking at it, you feel
Yeah.
that it's almost doing that. Yeah.
And it just you could just sort of wouldn't be surprised if it did just suddenly start sort of animating itself.
Yeah.
It seems to me that the work, although you come at it from this initially from this scientific perspective, that there is a spiritual or metaphysical, I don't know what word you would apply to it, but that it gets into something else about existence, and that's clear in some of the language in your statements. Do you think of it as, how do you think of that aspect of it? Is it spiritual? I know that word sometimes can start to be suggestive of something very specific, and I'm not trying to be specific about it so much, but how do you describe that aspect of the work?
Yeah, I'll probably frame it more from the point of view of this very deep natural inquiry, and the interest that I have on that, and that I have had all my life, and that pulls me towards just like the deep thinking about what is around us and the nature of things. And I mean, I don't know, if I would go for the spiritual, but it's just kind of like that, trying to connect to that ultimate that is around us, and that you can see everywhere, especially like us as living beings, and just kind of trying to delve into that constantly. I think that's that. Yes, I think that's it.
So that's why you started making art.
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead.
Was, yeah, it was, when I started, it was more kind of like a therapeutic, finding that therapeutic space in open space, just to connect to something different. I mean, through music, I have had kind of like that space, but somehow there was something very different to be able to see kind of like that result in front of you. Like I mean, one thing when you are playing music, of course, you can record your music or whatever, but it seems like everything is kind of like instantaneous and then it goes away. But then, with visual art, it's like all that inquiry and all that process somehow, you get just the imprint in there, and it is kind of like there forever. And I think that's, there's an important quality of that, of being able to, in a way, kind of like stop time and make like a print of that, which is not the same with music. I mean, the music will always be there, but you will never be able to play it the same way.
Mm-hmm.
But with visual art, then it isn't there. So yeah.
Live performance is always, no matter how many times you play a piece, it's always different each time.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Except when you record it.
Yeah, right.
As a live performance, it's always different. Is there was so I'm trying to think about how, so you come from this, the education and was science and medicine, and did you feel that the science didn't answer questions for you, didn't give you the opportunity to explore in the way that art did it, or do the two things flow together for you?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, let me just first just kind of preface that I have, like, art in my life has been very important since I was a little one. My parents, like my dad loves music, and so my mom, and she actually taught me to play piano, and my mom was really into crafts. And I remember when I was small, like she would these ceramic things, and she was amazing in how she used color. So I have those memories. I had like many seeds as I was growing up in exposure to the arts, and I always appreciated those. Um, and during that time, like, music was kind of like my outlet and what I chose. And then when I went into more like the science part of my life, which was pretty much from my 14 through 22 years old, that phase, yes, I concentrated definitely into science, in physics, and it was amazing. And of course, I recommend that to everyone. Not, no matter how young or old you are, that's kind of like a constant. But yes, there was a point um, when it felt a little bit dry.
Mm-hmm.
And not to say that I'm not interested still, because you get to learn things all the time, but there is a limit in that approach. And there is this whole other realm open that I think you can only access through, well, there's perhaps it is more like a complementary realm that that art allows you to get into. And so definitely, when I concentrated in the other area, I missed that part a lot, and I realized that actually I need that all the time. So yeah, um, it has been good to get back to that path.
I noticed so in the show, there was one piece. I think there was just one, if I'm not mistaken. That also the work is all it's basically two-dimensional. It's hung on the walls, but there was one piece that you incorporated a three-dimensionality. You used Sculpey to make a shape that sort of grew out of those patterns. And I see on your website you started doing some sculptures. I mean, I don't know, it just started. You may have been doing this for a little while, but um, what's it been like to get into three-dimensional work? How's that been different, or has it been different? How does that feel coming into that?
Yeah, that was something that I just did for a little bit, but I really enjoyed it. And that's something that I actually want to get more into. Pieces like the one that you're referring to, that is, like a mix of painting and then the 3D work. Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, it is always the possibility to just go beyond what you have been doing, and especially, after being working in this flat surface, then all of a sudden you have this third dimension. And especially, if I have that with the type of work that I like to do with all those little lines, then that the three-dimensional object really helps creating I don't know, even more like an alive result. So yes, that's something that I have been having in the back of my head, that I need to explore way more than what I have done so far.
Well, how long have you been doing that? Was that recent, or was that just a moment of experimentation?
Yeah, that was just a moment of experimentation a few years ago. Yeah.
Because again, it seemed like a very natural thing to have that shape coming out, and just given the kind of work that you're doing, again, because it does, it's an interesting question. Like, should you try to be three-dimensional? Because in some ways, particularly those more abstract paintings I was talking about that have such energy, they almost seem to be three-dimensional already. Because the way the color and the pattern sort of move or recede back and forth, and visually, it almost does seem like it's three-dimensional. So it's an interesting idea to go that way. Or maybe it's, sometimes it's too literal a thing happening in your work.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think I will keep exploring that part. On the other hand, I feel like there is, I mean, I have several ideas on what to do. Like, I have been working on this canvas now for a couple of years that I have not been able to finish. So, there are, like, as usual, more projects than what you have time for.
Do you have several pieces going at one time, or do you tend to start and finish and then go to the next one?
Yeah, usually I will end up having a few pieces at a time, not because I want to, but sometimes it is good to have a little bit of a change. And especially, since the pieces take quite some time, most of them, then it gets to a point in which it's very refreshing to just be working on several at the same time.
Well, it's a very common thing I find among artists, and sometimes it's dictated by medium. That sometimes if you're having to layer medium and different kinds of things, you have to do something and then step back and give it a day to dry. But you want to stay active, so you have several paintings or several pieces, and you can sort of move around between them, which is interesting because it seems like they have to be related, because you're sort of coming from the same, you're doing them all at the same time. So I'm always just curious to ask about process, and I think a lot of people who aren't artists, or who don't know artists very well, don't understand how much work it is and what kind of commitment it is, and how different approaches occur from different artists. So I'm always curious about that. So 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 what's next for you after, like, do you have other exhibition opportunities lined up? I know that's a tricky question for a lot of artists coming out of the pandemic, because I think a lot of galleries are still sort of getting back up on their feet and getting their schedules lined out. What do you have anything else lined up?
Not right now, but I'm obviously open to any invitation. Right now, pretty much I just finished setting this one up, so I am enjoying this one. And yeah, so as far as opportunities, there is nothing lined up yet.
Well, Uhma Janus, thank you so much for talking with me today. I'll mention again. So the show is called Beginnings. Is Beginnings, was that just an obvious, I don't know, I don't mean to, but like this is your
Mhm.
first show. So you've been working for, quite a while. You're not a brand new artist, but do you feel like you're at a beginning point?
It just felt, as I kind of mentioned earlier, this seems to be kind of, sometimes it's difficult to explain, but no, it is not like on the obvious meaning. It is from the point of view that this is the whole set, the end of the first set.
End of the beginning of the beginning.
Yes. Something like that.
No, I think that makes sense. This is in many ways, although that this is sort of an introduction of a kind for you.
Right. Yes.
So, okay. So Beginnings is at the Pigment Gallery at Melwood Art Center. It runs through July 30th. They have pretty good hours. So, so there's lots of opportunity to go to see the work. And so, Uhma, thank you for talking to me.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. Thank you for
Okay.
the opportunity.